here from Technical Services. Today we're going to be using After Effects to create a player profile with some stats that can appear on the screen either during a live TV broadcast or during esports events. This video already assumes that you know the basics of After Effects. If you don't, please familiarize yourself with that first before we get started. You'll also need to use some assets that you'll find at the link on the screen now. So to get started, what we're going to do is we're going to go up here to New Composition, and we are going to name our composition Player Profile. Now here you want to ensure that all of this information is the same as what your final program will be. So in our case, we're going to set this up for the Esports Hub, so it will be 1920 1080 at 50 frames a second. I'm going to press OK there. And now what we're going to do is I'm going to click over here and I'm going to import some of my assets. So the first one I want is this one here, which is the, it's called the gaming yellow background. And obviously we know that they are just the PlayStation icons. And what we're going to do is drag this video into our player profile composition. Now, the problem with this video is whilst it's great, it's only just over 3 seconds long, and that's not going to be long enough for what we need to do. So we're going to drag the video over a few times, and we're just going to stack them just so that they are long enough for what we need. So probably aiming for around 10-15 seconds, something like that should be long enough. And just make sure that there's no black bar in that when it loops. That one's okay there. And that one's okay there. And now what we're going to do, before we do anything else, we are going to Command S to save it. So now what we're going to do is we are going to pre-comp these sources just here. Now, if you're not sure what pre-comping is, it's the same as nesting in Premiere. It just means it's going to compile all of these together just into one single line that we can then do different things with. So we could apply scale, rotation, position, or we could just keep it nice and neat within our timeline. So I'm just going to select them all, right click, and then just call this one player background like this. Now next what I'm going to do is draw a shape. Now the shape that I'm going to draw is the shape that I want to hold all of the stats that I'm going to create. So first of all, what I'm going to do is make sure that nothing in the window down here, nothing in my timeline is selected. And then I'm going to go up to the top here to where all of my shapes are, and I'm going to pick rounded rectangle tool. Now you could pick any other shape that you like in here, but I'm going to pick rounded rectangle tool, and I'm going to draw a rectangle about that shape just there. In fact, for now, let's just take off the title action save so you can see a little bit better what I'm doing. So this section here is where all of my stats are going to appear, but I want this background behind to be within this shape instead of just the shape on the top. So what I'm going to do down here in my timeline, I'm going to press toggle switches / modes until I get this window that comes up here. And then what I'm going to do is the player background, which is the yellow background here, under my track matte option, I want my player background to be in the shape of shape layer 1. And when I click that, what that's done now is that's made that shape that we've just added have the new background that we have created. Now you could have it the other way round, and if I press this button to the right of it, what it's doing now is it's cut that shape out instead, so it's actually reversed it. So that's quite a useful tool to have. So there's the alpha or the track alpha or the Luma matte. So we're just going for alpha at the minute, and then this it just inverts that track. And again, anytime that you're using After Effects, just Command S just to keep saving that. And there you go. That's our first section complete. Now next what we're going to do is we need to add some smoke to the top and the bottom of this. I've got quite a nice smoke asset that I'm going to use. So I'm just going to find that as well. Now when you double click anything, it will just load the clip for you so you can see what it looks like without actually putting it into your timeline, because there is no source window like there is in Premiere. And now if I play it, that's the effect that I've got here. So I'm going to go back to my composition just by pressing the composition tab up here. And I'm going to drag this smoke onto this layer. Now I at the minute have got a transparent background, which is why I've got this checkerboard effect. You can switch that on or off just by toggling the transparency grid there. It might make it a little bit easier to see what you're doing. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to add smoke to the top of this box here. And then I'm going to duplicate this layer by Command D if you're on a Mac, or Control D if you're on Windows. And that's made 2 layers. And I'm going to drag this one down, and then I'm going to rotate this one. So that's keyboard shortcut R. And then I'm just going to rotate that 180 degrees. And if you can't get it exact, you can click in there and you can type the exact position that you want as well. And then I'm just going to put that there. Now don't worry that it's a bit messy up here. We're going to tidy that up in just a second. But about there looks good for me. And then I'm going to select both of them, right click and pre-compose, and I'm going to call this smoke overlay. So it's just about being as organized as possible. Name as many of these layers as you can so that later on it's a lot easier to find what you're looking for. And what we'll also do while we're organizing ourselves, let's right click up here and do new folder, and I'm going to create an assets folder, and those assets of the gaming background and the smoke overlay I'm just going to put in there to try and keep everything as neat as possible. Right, so now that that smoke overlay is done, what I'm going to do is drag this layer down. It works exactly the same as Photoshop in terms of layers and in Premiere in terms of layers. The layer that is on the top is the one that gets seen above everything else. And now let's go back and play that. So that doesn't look too bad. That looks quite smart. What I don't like, however, is that the smoke here and up here are now moving outside my shape. I think that looks a little bit messy. So what we're going to do for that, we're going to use a mask. And the way that we use a mask is make sure that you have the layer selected that you want. And that can be either your pre-comp, as I've got here, or that could just be an individual layer. But I'm going to select my pre-comp. I'm going to go up to the pen tool or the G keyboard shortcut. And I'm going to do the one down here first. All I'm going to do is just draw roughly around where I don't want the smoke to appear. Now what it's going to do at the minute is you can only see it in that area. So, but actually what I want is the other way around. I want to see it everywhere but this area. So all we do for that is this little arrow here. If I go down to masks, mask 1, we've only got one mask at the minute. And instead of add, I'm going to choose subtract. And what that's done, that's taken that shape away. But now if I click off it, it's sort of a bit of a rough line there. It doesn't really look the best. So I'm going to go back to my mask and I'm going to change my mask feather, and I'm just going to add some feather to that and then just reshape it a little bit. And now if I click off it again, there you go. That looks a lot nicer. So I'm just going to do the same with the one up here. Just draw around what I don't want. And then this time in mask 2, let's select subtract. And let's ramp up that mask feather. So there you go, that looks a bit neater. And what you'll notice here is that at 10 seconds, the smoke disappears, and that's just because of the end of the video. So what you could do is double click into that layer, and you could duplicate these layers and move them forward. The problem I've got at the minute is because the smoke doesn't loop, when it gets to the end, it looks a bit untidy. So I'm not going to do that today, but you could spend longer on that and tidy that up if you wanted or needed to. So what I'm going to do instead is that when it gets to this 10-second point, I'm actually going to shorten my composition to just be 10 seconds. So I'm going to drag this to the end here and right click and do trim comp to work area. And what that'll do now is that's just made that a full 10 seconds. Now you could also do it at the top by going to composition settings and just changing your duration there to whatever you need. So let's just play all that through. Just make sure that that looks fine before we start adding anything else to it. Now the more complex that you start making your composition, the longer that it will take to render. This green line that runs down here is your render line. You can change your quality of the quality of the video that it's previewing down here if your computer does struggle with it, or just be a bit patient with it, and it will get there shortly. So what I'm going to do next, I'm going to add my player in here now. So again, you need to go back to your assets, and you have 3 to choose from here. Let's go back here. So we've got 1, 2, 3. What I'm going to do, I'm going to use player 2. So let's just close that tab, and I'm going to drag player 2 on top here. Now, because this video is in 4K, whereas the sequence that we're in is 1080, obviously this video is larger than the size that we're working in. So all I'm going to do to resize that is select that layer, press S for scale, and then I can make the scale as I like. So around there is quite good, and I'm going to move that player to just about there. And again, let's save that. So next what I need to do is get rid of this green, because this isn't what I need. So in my effects window, now if you don't have this window, by the way, you can go up to window workspace at the top, and you can select it from there. You can select effects, and there it would appear down there. There we go. And in here, I'm now just going to search for key light. Now key light is the name of the keying effect on After Effects. Now we're quite lucky with this video here. It's got a very nice even background, so that isn't going to be an issue to key out. If you do want to know how to film with green screen, then do have a chat with the media center, and we can look at putting some sessions on. So all I'm going to do up here in screen color, I'm going to click the little eyedropper next to screen color and select it like that. And that will get rid of our green. Now you could alter the settings here if the key wasn't quite perfect, but I'm quite happy with that. So let me just play that again. And again, it will be a bit jittery because it's rendering as it's playing through for the first time. So now what I'm going to start doing, I'm just going to select all these and press that just to make it a little bit easier to see. We're now going to start adding our text here, because in this section here, this is where our all of our stats are going to go. So I'm just going to go up to the top here into the text tool, and I'm going to type this player name. I'm going to select that, and I'm going to change the color of mine because white is quite hard to see against this yellow. So I'm going to select black. That will be a lot easier to read. And then I'm going to go through and I'm going to find a nice font. Let's go with that one. And let's try 100, if I can go a little bit bigger than that. Player name goes in just there. And now what I'm going to do is just duplicate that layer and move that down. Now I'm just going to start just filling this in. And then you could just, we'll just leave this bottom section blank for now, but you could put in some additional information in there. Now what I'm currently noticing is that this video behind, because it's still quite sharp at the minute, it might make this text a little bit harder to see. So let's add a blur to this video behind. And so I'm going to find player background composition. And then in here, this is where our videos are, but let's add the blur by right-clicking, go into new and adjustment layer. And then back in our effects tab up here, if I search for blur, in here there is an option called Gaussian blur. If I just drag that effect onto that adjustment layer, I can now increase the amount of blurriness that I want within this video. So let's go to around 10. Let's try what that looks like. Now, because I've added it as an adjustment layer, everything below this adjustment layer will have whatever effect I've added to it. So adjustment layers are quite a useful way to add the same effect to a lot of different videos underneath it. And if I go back here, So that's slightly easier to read the text now. So like that. So now I'm quite happy with what that looks like. I'm quite happy with the design, but I could still have a little bit more animation on it than what we've currently got. So let's add a little bit of movement into it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this background here, this player background, I'm going to move that out of frame and bring it in. Now normally you would be selecting this player background composition just here, but when I select P for position, if I start moving that up and down, it doesn't actually move the box up and down, it just moves the video around that's in it. What I need to do is move the shape layer itself. So if I select the shape layer and go to P, now you've got 960 by 540, so your 540 is your up and down, your 960 is left and right. So I'm just going to click this and I'm going to drag it all the way down like that. And I'm going to switch on my keyframe here. And then let's go to 1 second. Now I think 1 second will be too slow, but let's try it at 1 second. And I know that that number in there before said 540. So if I type that back in again. Now when I play it, let's let it render. Let's try again. So it's just moved that layer. Now don't worry that it hasn't moved all the others. We're going to sort that out shortly. But that does move too slowly for me. So to increase the speed, with our 2 keyframes down here, I'm going to click the end one, the right hand side one, and I'm going to drag it more to the left. So it's now at 24 frames that it finishes on. Let's save it and let's just try that again. That's slightly better, maybe still a little bit too slow. Let's just try it once more. So I'm quite happy with that. That's a nice duration. And what I also want to do is add some motion blur. Motion blur is the #1 thing that I pick anytime I do some animation within After Effects because it just adds to that realism. So all I'm going to do here and in shape layer, I'm going to select this little square here, which is just in the same line as motion blur. And now if I move my keyframes back a little bit, you'll see that it's blurred this edge here. So it gives it a nice realistic look. And let's also add what's called easy ease. Now what that does is instead of it moving in a controlled fashion, it'll slow up, it'll ramp up to the speed and then slow back down. So I'm going to select both of these, right click, keyframe assistant and choose easy ease. And you'll see now what it's done is it's changed the keyframes to this little sand timer look. And now if I go back, let's save it and play it again. Now it might be quite hard to see with such a short duration, but it definitely is doing something and it's just making it a little bit more easier on the eye. It just slows it down just before it gets to its final position. So now that I'm happy with that, what I want to do is attach all of these different layers to this motion. Now the good thing with After Effects is you don't have to go in and copy and paste these keyframes onto each of the layers. You can use what's called a pick whip to select other layers to say follow the same path as this layer. So what I mean by that is I'm going to choose my player name and my stats here and make sure that your playhead is after the transition has finished. And then here, where next to where it says none, there's this little squiggly line which is a pick whip. If I click that and drag that onto shape layer 1, here it now says shape layer in this little drop down window. So I'm going to do the same again and pick shape layer. And now when I move my position back, the text now moves with this box. And as we did with the others, I can tick motion blur for these 2 layers as well. And so now the box appears with it. So let's just do the same thing again with smoke overlay. I'm going to click that to there. And then I'm going to add some motion blur. So that moves quite nicely. Now what you'll see here is the bottom of my frame has still got the smoke in it because the box doesn't move quite far enough out of the bottom of that frame. So all I'm going to do for that is I'm going to move this smoke overlay over and then I'm going to keyframe the opacity, which is the T keyboard shortcut, and I'm going to go from 0 to 100. So now there's no smoke here. In fact, let's put it back to where it was before and see if that gives us a better result. There we go. That's quite good. So now if I go frame by frame, you can see that the smoke will slowly start to fade in as that box appears. Now the final thing we haven't done anything with our player yet. Our player doesn't move from the position that they're in there. So what we could do is we could move them to follow the same path as the box. So if I choose my player profile and player background, do that, there we go. And then let's add some motion blur in here. Now you could have them all coming up like that. Or we could have our player move in from a different angle. So you could have the box appear in, and then we could, let's copy that number. That's for the final position I want it to be in. We could go to there, keyframe that position to about there. And let's easy ease these two as well. Again, save it. Now that doesn't look too bad, but this will be a little bit of a design challenge as to what you or your producer or your director is after, because if you're going to spend all this time doing it in After Effects, you don't want it to look like you could have made it in PowerPoint. So just try a few different things and see what you think works. Now, I'm not entirely sure that that did work, so I've deleted that, and I'm going to just move that with the shape layer here. And there you go. So that is how you create your first player profile. So what you could now do is you can export this as a video that you can import into your graphics packages. Now bear in mind there is no background. If I take that off, you can see there is no background, so you can overlay this on top of something else, your live production for instance. Or you could just import this composition into Premiere and you can edit it right into your packages. You can also export this as a template. So I'm going to show you how you do that now. You need to go to Window and Essential Graphics. Let's open the Essential Graphics tab, and you get this window that appears here. So now what I'm going to do is, the composition that I want to use is Player Profile. Let's do Set Poster Time, so it looks like this. And I'm going to call this Player Profile. And now you can add in the things that you want to change. So I want to be able to change the player name. So to do that, you'd normally just drag and drop. But if you do that with text, it doesn't work. You get this error message. So what you have to do is click the little side arrow, go into text again, and you want to drag the source text window in. And we'll just do that one with the stat. Source text here. Now the great thing about After Effects is you can click Edit Properties and you can decide what you want to allow your end users to be able to do. So for instance, if you're working on a live production where the graphics need to have a specific font, for instance, then you can untick this option here that says Enable Font Size Adjustment and Enable Font Selection, which will mean that whoever is editing this cannot change the size of the font or the font itself. So it can be quite useful for those things there. And we also need to be able to change our player profile here. So I'm going to drag this in just like that. And so these three things are the things that we will allow people to change. So now let's press Export Motion Graphics and yes, save. So it's going to take a couple of seconds. I'm going to keep mine in local templates folder. Okay, yes, okay. And just as it's finishing that, let's load up Premiere to see how it works within Premiere. Okay, so we've jumped into Premiere. Let's just create a very quick sequence. And now when I go to Window and Essential Graphics, you should find it here. Mine's just at the top along with some of the other graphics that I've just created. So let's drag this in. And it'll take a couple of seconds to load. Let's just close this window again so we can see what we're doing. There we go. And now I can actually I just need to go back to the Essential Graphics tab, because now if I click it here, I can then add that person. So let's add my name. Stat 1. So let's fill in the stats. There you go. Now this is the problem that you will have if you type things that are too long. If you haven't allowed the font size to be changed, which it hasn't here, it will go over this image here, and there's nothing that you can do about it. So that is quite a good thing to point out just there, that changing the size of it might be quite useful. And then if we want to change the video, if we just drag this video onto here, what it's going to do is, because the green is exactly the same, it's keyed out that green exactly the same as it did before. And now if I put that full screen, you have that that very nice, very quick, very easy to update template just there.